Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Women Energy webinar hosted by Vortexa. My name is Pamela Munger, and I'm one of the senior market analysts here at Vortexa. I joined Vortexa as the first analyst in a room full of data engineers. I was the first oil analyst and one of the first 5 members at Vortexa's inception, helping to work very hard to build the beginnings of what today is a global platform that tracks real-time energy flows and freight for the application of physical, financial, and freight trading and commodities trading space. I have extensive experience working across international trading and shipping teams at both the physical and derivative trading floors in Europe and in the US. And I've been fortunate enough to be involved in building and implementing various technology platforms for trading markets. I'm very excited to be here today because it's a little bit different than what I'm normally talking about. So this is quite fun. Today, we're very grateful and we welcome Grace Kimberley from Powerful Women, Laura Berger, Portfolio Director, Head of European Liquid Fuels and Chemicals for the HC Group, and Anastasia Davies, who leads Global Renewable Fuels Research at Bloomberg in New York. We are very excited for you to be here, and we're very grateful for your time. Just a few housekeeping details before we get started. Today's webinar will run for 1 hour and 10 minutes, and it will feature 2 sessions. And the first session will be focusing on why gender diversity is such a key topic in the industry. And the second topic will be really focused on how we can build a more diverse workforce going forward. Both sessions will run on this particular link if you've joined, and all audience members are on the listen-only mode, but you can ask questions on the Q&A, which we encourage at the bottom of your screen, and we will attempt to answer those at the end of the session, obviously as many as possible, given the fairly short time frame. The webinar is also recorded, and we will share the recording tomorrow. Enough with all of that, and I'm going to ask you guys to kindly introduce yourselves, and if you could talk briefly about your experience in the energy sector. Thank you.
Shall I go first, Pamela?
Sure. Sorry. Yes, go first.
Hi, everybody. Happy International Women's Day to you all. My name is Grace Kimberley. I am a project officer at Powerful Women. That is my day job. And I'm also project manager of the Women's Energy Network Alliance. So Powerful Women is an initiative set up by Baroness Sandy Verma and Laura Sands, who were in office at the time in the UK government. And we're looking around the room going, where are all the women? As I'm sure has happened to many of us on this call today, and that was why they took it upon themselves to start Powerful Women. So we focus on gender diversity at the top of the UK energy sector. So that's women in senior exec positions, at board level, NEDs, and we try and also focus on the executive pipeline, so those coming through into senior leadership. And the Women's Energy Network Alliance is actually an umbrella of gender diversity initiatives like Powerful Women. So we try to come together, and our motto is to not leave a woman behind. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Laura?
Sure. Hi, Pamela. Happy International Women's Day to everyone. Very excited to be here. So I'm Laura Berger. I'm a portfolio director at HC Group. So we are a commodities search and advisory firm covering the global commodity markets. I've spent the entirety of my career in commodity search and first started in the industry about 11 years ago, working with another firm, initially in New York, growing the Americas oil practice, before relocating to London to grow the European oil and LNG practice back in 2017. And then I joined HC 2 years ago to lead the European liquid fuels practice, so covering crude products, petrochemicals, renewable fuels, and future fuels, all very heavily male-dominated industries. Unfortunately, the search side is not much different, but very excited to be here and talk about how we can help drive change.
Very good,
Great.
thank you.
Yeah, and I can round us out. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here and join you guys on International Women's Day. My name is Anastasia Davies. I lead the renewable fuels team at BloombergNEF, which is a research and analysis provider under the bigger Bloomberg umbrella. My background is across economics and energy. I studied both in school. I'm from California originally, so my background initially was in renewable energy, but I worked at the Federal Reserve for a while in their international trade branch, and that got me interested in some of the more commodity focused markets. So I've been with BNEF for about 7 years now, covering their natural gas and LNG team, jumping over into oil and now into the renewable fuels team, which is growing tremendously. So I've seen a lot of the space across both energy and economics, and I think to join the theme here, those are very male-dominated industries. So it's great to be here to chat about representation across the sector.
That's great. Thank you. That's great. Really, really great backgrounds we have here. Now, Grace, could you kindly cover some of the key statistics around women in the workplace globally, and maybe what have been some positive changes in recent years?
Yeah, sure. So I want to start by saying there's definitely been lots of positives, because I think sometimes these conversations can seem a bit doom and gloom, and it's important to recognise that there has been progress in recent years, and certainly more attention around this topic. I mean, I was going to a few conferences last week, and I'm noticing now in general energy conferences that inclusion and diversity is scattered across the agenda, as opposed to, you know, a kind of afterthought towards the end of the conference, which I think is really positive to see, because it definitely indicates that business leaders see this as a priority now, which is great to see. But in terms of where we're at the moment, the International Energy Agency released its World Energy Employment Report in 2022, and women account for 16% of employment in the world's traditional energy sectors globally. So if we want to compare, that's compared to the global workforce, in which women make up 39%. So if you compare it in that sense, we're actually there's a long way to go in terms of looking at other industries, which is probably not a surprise, but you know, it just shows that there's still some way to go on that. And I think what we can take away from that is that we're nowhere near where we should be if we're hoping to achieve gender parity, and the need for diverse talent has never been more prevalent than now, I think, with this race to net zero. And then we look at the senior level, so Powerful Women, my company I mentioned earlier, and we actually report on the senior levels of women, so the numbers of women on boards, women that are in executive positions, and women hold 27% of board seats in the top 80 energy employers, and then 15% of executive director positions. But what I found quite shocking in that is that 75% of companies have no female execs at all, and 23% have no women on their boards. And to be honest, that makes me sick to my stomach, because what an opportunity that's missed with that, for diversity of thought, for unique ideas. And for context, the FTSE 350 has just hit 40% women on boards. So when we're looking at the global workforce and the wider sectors, they're doing a lot better than energy, to say the least. But I think it's important to also take it back to the positives and see the interest that is out there and the buy-in to diversity inclusion right now. And that's why the dial is shifting very slowly, I think.
Yeah, that's it's a really good point you make about it shifting very slowly. But I have to say, just posting this particular webinar just on my LinkedIn, I know it's a small sample size, but I was really amazed at how it wasn't gender specific, the amount of interest that was shown in this particular webinar. And I mean, I have to admit, most of my LinkedIn are energy related, energy sector, given my career, and I was really impressed by that. So I mean, I think, like you said, it's evolving, it's changing, and the more we talk about it, the more likely things will change and will have that influence. And Anastacia, I wanted to ask you, why is gender diversity so important in the energy sector, and kind of what should we be aiming for?
Sure, yeah, it's interesting to hear Grace's statistics. I mean, representation in the sector is something, there's sort of the practicality of course, we should be represented as half the population is female, so you should have female representation across all industries. But at BNEF, we wanted to dive into the numbers and see if you could make even a business case for it, right? You always have to come down to, it doesn't matter from a corporate perspective. And we actually did find some interesting results. So if we looked at, for companies that had 30% or more female representation on corporate boards, we actually did find that they had a positive correlation with better environmental governance and innovation in the company as a whole. Now, that's not to say that you put females on the boards and immediately you can see emissions reductions happen. It's not quite that big of a magic bullet. But we did see that those companies tended to set more environmental targets and emissions related targets, and that they did try and promote more innovation strategies and digitization strategies across the companies. So we can see that the presence of diversity can have a measurable effect on the way these companies are run and the way that they are prioritized.
Thank you. That's yeah, that's great. I've really good statistics. Certainly, I've been doing a little bit of research as well recently, just to cover this and kind of having not really looked at the details in a while. I've actually didn't mention it before, but I have a history in HR as well before I moved over to more commercial trade floor type activities, and it's something that we used to look at very closely and measure, of course. I mean, you could definitely see it was kind of at the beginning of the change. You can see that having the statistics ran, having more women on the board certainly translated to more pay equity. I think also there's stats that prove that it kind of helps policies that help both men and women as well. So it really promotes kind of a better workplace, not only, like you said, with encouraging innovation, but also the correlations to climate performance and just better business cases. Great, thanks for that. Laura, would you like to talk about the work that the HC group does with organizations looking to benchmark and increase their diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think diversity and gender diversity in particular is obviously a subject that's coming up in every conversation that we're having. And I think one that is firmly on the radar for the majority of organizations. While there has certainly been an increase in the percentage of women in the industry, the majority of these individuals, at least kind of on the trading side, the majority of these individuals still sit within functional roles, and women are still significantly underrepresented within front office positions. Where I think the numbers that Grace mentioned are probably a lot smaller than that across kind of trading and origination. With that said, we are seeing stronger female representation across kind of the products linked to the energy transition piece, which I think is a great start. I do think there's a genuine interest in organizations who are looking to diversify their workforce across the board. With that in mind, though, a lot of the players in our markets are not publicly listed organizations where they're not necessarily held accountable to diversity metrics. And while that interest is there, I think the majority of that change we're seeing within the corporate, whereas there's the mindset to change and they have access to the right resources and they can implement, I think most importantly, the right benefits to help drive diversity forward. And when we talk about kind of senior level hiring, the challenge that we're seeing is that there's such a limited talent pool to consider in the first place. And that investment needs to start at the graduate level, because I think the first hurdle to cross is even just attracting women into our industry, in the first place. And I think that's where employers need to do a better job at representing the sector as a whole when it comes to attracting graduates, and particularly diverse graduates. And the first barriers to entry are simple things such as job descriptions, which are often written with male applicants in mind and can deter women from applying to these roles in the first place. One way that we help attract women to the industry is by providing those who have been able to make a successful career with a platform through which they can be heard. So we have our In Conversation With series, which interviews CEOs across the industry. And we've been fortunate enough to have some fantastic female leaders as part of that initiative, particularly when you can consider that you can probably count on two hands the number of female-run trading organizations within the industry. We've also launched an insight series that spotlights women in leadership roles across various industries and discusses their journey on how they got to where they are today. And I think, these voices are incredibly important in attracting and retaining talent. When you're spending day in and day out sitting with individuals or next to individuals who've had a very different career journey to you, it's really important to have somewhere to turn and to be able to inspire the next generation of female leaders. I think, even among the quantity search firm, there's a significantly kind of lower representation of women as well. So to address that, we partner with 15 West, which is on a program which is called Level Up. So that program gives female recruiters the confidence to operate in male-dominated industries, and that's designed to not only level the playing field, but by extension, with more female recruiters giving a different perspective in the industry, we can help drive that change forward. And within the recruitment sector, the conversations that are being had, or across the conversations that we're having on a daily basis, we can help that minority talent community rethink what's possible. Looking at some of the statistics, men will apply to a job when they meet only 60% of the criteria, but women will only apply when they meet 100% of the criteria typically. So we can kind of help level that playing field. And also kind of being very fortunate to sit in front of leaders in our industry on a regular basis. We have a lot of women in our organization. And I think one of the greatest attributes that we can provide from a search perspective kind of across the industry is when women are in the industry is that we can provide a different perspective on hiring to the one that's been heard over the last few decades. So in order to drive change, we do have to challenge the stereotypes and address some of the systematic gender biases that we're witnessing and help kind of provide some tangible actions to overcome these. And I think, when we look at trading in particular, relationships are formed at a peer-to-peer level, and these conversations often take place outside of the meeting room, and outside of a meeting room, probably outside of a pub instead. And that's where these relationships turn from professional to personal and become invaluable for success in the industry. And naturally, this type of environment typically caters to men, particularly once women have children. And this is where we often see the career trajectory then for women slowing down in comparison to their male peers, where it's kind of significantly going up. So if we can start kind of changing the dynamics, getting more women into senior leadership and executive leadership and board level, that then trickles down to the entire organization. And I think it's also incredibly important to have these conversations driven by both men and women. At the end of the day, as we found out from all the statistics, it's no secret that the majority of the voices in our industry are still men. And we need these voices if we want to be able to achieve, not just equality, which is the first step, but most importantly, achieving equity in the industry as well.
Very good. You raised a lot of really interesting points there, certainly. I guess the first one that jumps out, we've just gone through a round of searching for a graduate analyst here in Vortexa, so a hiring round. And so you mentioned how could we make our job requisites more gender friendly, I suppose, or gender equity based, I suppose is the correct word. And could you give us some sort of tips on that? Do you know that level of detail, or kind of, yeah, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, sure. And I think at the graduate level, it's probably easier than to answer than at the senior level. But I think one of the first things when women look at job descriptions is they're looking at every single bullet point in terms of their required experience and also kind of the more nice to have ones. And even when it comes to the nice to have, if they feel like they're not ticking the majority of those boxes, if they're not ticking 100% of the required and the majority of the nice to have, they're probably not going to apply to these jobs in the first place. Whereas men will kind of say, okay, well, I tick most of these boxes, so let me apply, and then I'll kind of figure it out as I go along, which is a great ambition to have. But I think one of the things that we can look at is looking at what is really necessary for this. And if it's not 100% necessary, do we have to put that on the job description, or do we not kind of keep the job description a little bit broader? And then in the interview series, then we can talk, or in the interview panels, then we can do a little bit of a deeper dive, because oftentimes kind of once you're in these situations of having conversations, you find people have a lot of different attributes that they can kind of bring to the table as well, outside of kind of what's just listed on the job description. So I think that's the first step. Obviously, as you get more senior, those skill sets become a lot more concrete, and then it's a slightly different story. But I think at the graduate level, that's probably the first place to start.
Very good. Very interesting. Thank you. And just from your knowledge, can you name any demonstrable benefits for targeting greater diversity at more of a senior level?
Yeah, I think the first one is one that we started to see over the last few years, which is the ability to have some flexibility to work from home. And that needs to be not just, oftentimes in the conversations that we're having, we're saying, a lot of companies want to come back 5 days a week, but actually what we saw is having, maybe 1 or maybe 2 days a week from home actually gives a lot more flexibility to women in the industry. And the most important thing to consider is sometimes when companies say, okay, well, maybe we'll give that to mothers. And we're speaking specifically for women with children, we'll give that to mothers. But actually what we need to do is kind of give it across the board, because then, the fathers can help with, school runs and pickups and drop-offs and with those things. So I think that's one of the first tangible aspects. We've seen some organization. There's one trading business that goes as far as to pay for things like IVF and egg freezing to help kind of women who want to have children later on in their career as well. So I think there's a myriad of benefits. And when I mentioned in the beginning, we're seeing it more from the corporate level. It's because they can have kind of more of these larger benefits program than maybe some of the smaller kind of trading houses as well. So I think those are kind of two of the first places where we can start, but that kind of flexibility is a big one, of course.
Yeah, I think you mentioned sort of giving the partner flexibility as well, so it's on both sides, so you can kind of give your own, a time to manage both careers, if in fact that's what
creating the equity, not just kind of the equality there.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, really good point. Okay, so let's ask a few more questions. Let's go back to Grace. She looks like she's raring to talk there. I don't know why, I just get that sense. I don't know.
I didn't mean to.
No, not at all. It's great. What would you like to see in the industry in the next 10 years? What are your thoughts on that horizon?
I think from my standpoint, Powerful Women's got a target of 40% women in middle management and leadership roles in the energy sector by 2030. I think that's quite that's a hefty target, and we've moved that. So it was 30%, and we've recently moved it, and we've also encapsulated some of the lower levels as well, because everything's like a domino effect, right? Everyone eventually leads into senior leadership. So I totally agree with Laura that focusing on recruitment and STEM outreach is really important, and it's also important to, I think, make sure that the women that are already in the workforce feel included and that they're thriving, not just surviving. I think that's where I'd like to see the industry in a place in, say, well, now ideally, but in some time. I think that there's so many women that we speak to on our network that are they're facing so much discrimination, so much unconscious bias, being overlooked for promotions constantly at work, for much of the things that Laura was mentioning around, not having access to certain social events. And it's little things like that which really can be the difference of you being promoted and progressing through your career. And so I think it's whilst I think recruitment is so important, I think it needs to be paired with inclusion of the already amazing talent and unique perspectives that we've already got in the sector. And that goes for all types of diversity and minority groups, right? Not just women, but and I think it was you that said earlier, Pamela, that actually in helping women and supporting women, you support everyone, and that really is very much the case. I think, unless we're truly representative of society and the consumers that we support, I think that only then are we going to be truly successful and fit for the net zero future. So that's where I'd like to see it, Pamela.
Very good. I like your ambitious answer.
Yeah, can I just jump in as well? On the back of that, like this whole push to try and increase diversity and voices in the room is not happening in a vacuum, right? We're in an industry where the next 10 years is actually probably going to be quite critical, and need to see a major shift in energy in order to meet emissions targets and climate targets. And so we're already in this sector that is undergoing major change, is going to need to be very innovative and really change the way it's acting, performing, and things move around. It's a perfect opportunity to try and reach out to have more voices available. Studies have shown that women are often more trusted voices when it comes to times of crisis. And so it could be a benefit both from a company level and even for a gender diversity level in order to say, okay, now's a great time. We've got a lot of new sectors we maybe need to look into, or we need to restructure how we're prioritizing our capital investment for the next 10 years. Let's try and bring in more voices and more perspectives and see how that works. So I think both the timing of it and the industry that we're in might actually be benefits for trying to achieve these targets of gender diversity.
Yeah,
good point.
I totally agree with you, Anastasia. I think as well, it's making sure that I think business owners, business leaders are seeing this as a priority. I always say, if you're doing it because it's the right thing to do, then you're not doing it for the right reason. It's been proven time and time again that you know, diversity of thought and having unique ideas is absolutely pivotal to businesses' successes. So I think it's shifting from that ideal of, oh, we should do this, it's the right thing to do, of no, actually, when we have diversity of thought, we think outside the box, creativity is up, and companies become more unique and understand the people around them and gain more customer insight.
Very good point. Good point. Thank you. Laura, any thoughts on the next 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I'm going to speak more towards the trading side, just because that's the market that I know best. I think, you know, getting to complete parity in the next 10 years is definitely going to be a challenge, just because we don't have that great diversity at a senior level. But I think I'd love to see, you know, when you look at over the next 10 years, seeing kind of from a graduate level into kind of the junior and mid-level roles, seeing that diversity increasing. And I think, you know, when I mentioned before, also, when we look at energy transition, there's actually a lot more diversity in those markets, and there seems to be some form of kind of natural correlation. So I think when we start looking at biofuels and SAF and hydrogen and a few of the other kind of future fuels and energy transition markets, seeing kind of more of a diverse workforce there, hopefully that will kind of start influencing some other markets. But, you know, as these markets continue to grow, and a lot of organizations obviously have significant targets linked to energy transition, hopefully from those products, we'll see a lot of kind of female leaders shift up to that executive level and to that board level, which will then kind of, you know, influence how the rest of the organization is shaped and start attracting kind of new, I guess, new voices into the business from the bottom up, which will then become the future leaders when we look at, you know, 15 to 20 years down the line. And I think, you know, from my side also, you know, a lot of the conversations that I'm still having when we're speaking to companies about roles that looking to hire, the conversation's always like, we'd like this him to have this, or we'd like him to be able to do this, or we'd like him to be able to have that skill set. Even just little tweaks, like saying we'd like him or her, or we'd like they, or we'd like, you know, just having diversity from that small onset. I think that will start to shift kind of the mindset, and hopefully that will kind of have an influence into kind of how we address and kind of push diversity forward in the markets as well.
Very good, very good. I'm conscious, aware now that we're coming close to the end of time. I had another question, but let's take it from the audience in the essence of time. The first question for each of the panelists: can you describe what the differences between equity versus equality mean to you?
Sure, I can jump in here. I think there's
Okay.
a fantastic image of it's three individuals kind of at, I think it's at a baseball game or something, and there's a fence. And the equality piece is kind of everyone being able to be at that game, but then you have kind of one person who's tall enough to see to kind of look over the fence, and then once that's kind of the equality image, everyone's there. And then when you move over to equity, it's kind of the one who's not able to kind of look over the fence, having a box so that he's able to look over the fence. So, you know, to me, it's kind of equality is, you know, it's great to have diversity, but equity is kind of when we're all very equally represented, all of our voices are heard, and we actually all, you know, particularly with women, considering, you know, the hours that we're working outside of our core work hours, when, you know, I don't have a family yet, but for those who do have families, you know, that's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration. So providing benefits that kind of allows for that equity, I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, so through policy changes essentially is kind of what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
And anyone else?
No, I think Laura explained it beautifully. I would just, I think from my perspective, it's, you know, you imagine there's two people that one starts at a different behind the other in a race and then they go off. There's no way, unless you know, that person that was behind is Usain Bolt, that they're going to get to the finish line, they're going to win. So it's about giving people that, you know, that are minorities the tools and the support they need to succeed and thrive in the same way as everyone else.
Yeah, I think Laura and Grace have hit it on the head. Making sure that everybody can kind of have the same opportunity to get to the end goal, the end finish line.
Yeah, very, very good. I think certainly like the flexibility that we have now from the work from home certainly has made a big difference for me. I feel like I can give 110% at work and still be there for the family time. Yeah, so I've got a small child, so it's been a real game changer. I feel very fortunate. Another question here I think is really important to ask. You know, we're seeing these improvements for gender diversity, and Laura, you certainly spoke of it at the graduate level and changing the requisites. But considering that there's so many organizations that are still very far behind, and you know, how do you bring those into the fold? How do you convince them?
Were you directing that at anyone specific?
No.
Brilliant. I'm happy to answer that. It's something that myself and my colleagues have been discussing quite a lot, so I feel quite passionate about this. I think what we need to do is get this agenda on the global stage and get it on the general, you know, energy events and conferences that are going on, as opposed to, you know, this huge cluster now of diversity and inclusion events, which are great, but are often preaching to the converted, right? So I actually think we do need to access those global and general energy agendas with our campaigning, with our events. And also we need to have more allies, I think, in terms of male allies, but you know, anyone working in the sector. We need more sponsorship. So we need, you know, successful people in the company, you know, establishing a woman, a talented and a passionate and driven woman, and elevating her and giving her the platform to shine and to thrive, I think is super important. And also you need allies in order for everyone in the workforce to have empathy for some of the challenges and barriers that women in this sector ultimately face, I think.
And I'll dive in too. I think you kind of always need leaders and you always need followers, and that's going to be true also from a corporate perspective as well. But the more companies we can get in that leader role in terms of showing more diversity and displaying this talent pipeline, then we have more, I speak from a data perspective, I'm an analyst, more data to prove that this is a beneficial thing. So one thing Bloomberg is doing is trying to make sure we try and measure as much as we can on the gender and equality and diversity metrics across companies, and present that data alongside financial performance and everything else on company level. So you can quickly see how companies with different diversity metrics perform on various other financial metrics or business metrics compared to their other peers. And I think the more we can see those kind of data come out, and especially if it shows beneficial results, which it looks like it's already starting to preliminary metrics, and certainly I think it makes a lot of sense. I'm pretty confident that we'll see companies with better diversity performing better, especially when it comes to facing crises, facing transitions. That should be another element that helps convince the laggards that this is something they should probably pursue.
Yeah, I think I think those statistics are so important, Anastacia. So I think, but of course I'm an analyst as well. But I think the more you do the research and you get that research out there and sort of put it in big business terms, get on the train or the train's going to leave you, you know, it's going to have an impact on your bottom line. I think all of that is that momentum that is certainly necessary to move things forward. Anyone else on any other opinions?
I think just tying things up from what Anastasia and Grace both said, I think it's so important that, and we start to do it, is not just having these conversations behind closed doors and having them among women. It's kind of having to get them onto a bigger stage. And I know from our side, you know, oftentimes these conversations are had with the few kind of female leaders that we had, or with HR or with diversity officers, but it's actually broadening that and having them with, you know, the heads of analytics, with the heads of operations, trading, origination, kind of across the board, and really having deep dives into how do we change those, how do we change kind of the platform as well. So just, you know, echoing what Grace and Anastasia said, just kind of increasing the platform where our voices are heard.
Very good. And I do have one more question because I'm curious to get your opinion on the networking thing. Laura, you touched on it, hubs, that kind of thing, the natural networking flow. What's your recommendation for women looking to network, where, how, considering time constraints possibly as well. What are your thoughts on women in networking?
Yeah, I think that's the hard one. I think, naturally our industry is a super social one, and I think you're not going to change kind of where these conversations are taking place overnight. We don't necessarily want to at all levels. I think there's little things as, even, you look at IE Week, which we had last week, let's look at starting some of those events earlier so that kind of more women are able to, women are able to event. There's a number of different organizations that are linked to businesses like Wiese, kind of the women in shipping industry, and I'm conscious of time, and quite a few others. But I think that's still a big hurdle to cross. And oftentimes what we do see is these networking groups are women only. But actually, again, talking about the platform where our voices are heard, is that you're opening these up to kind of the male counterparts as well. So the conversations and dialogue is happening with with both the men and women. Like I said, the men are still the majority in our industry, so getting them involved in the conversation, and I think most people are quite open to kind of wanting to learn and understand and diversify the industry. So just opening up those discussions kind of across the board, and not just having kind of female only representation is something that I feel can definitely help address that. But still, there's still lots to be done in that space specifically.
Yeah, very good. And any thoughts, Grace? Grace, your thoughts on?
Yeah, I would just echo what Laura said. I mean, I think if you're at the moment, Laura's right. It's totally hard because as Laura said, it's not front of mind right now. Making these events more accessible, unfortunately. But I think there are initiatives and networks out there, such as Powerful Women, that are thinking of these things. So the Women in Energy networks, or that potentially there's Women in Trading networks as well, in energy shipping. There's always a network that you can go to, and those people will be thinking of these things on your behalf. So for example, Powerful Women, we host networking breakfasts, networking lunches. We host a lot of coaching sessions online as well. So that if you look in the right place, and I'm more than happy to provide any links to any of the events that I have access to or that we're running, if anyone needs them. But yes, you're right, Laura. It's not where it needs to be at the moment, and unfortunately, the odds are against us right now. And hopefully, that will change as we open the conversation up more.
Yep, I think we're going to have to stop it here for now, but I just wanted to say thank you. This is a great place to network. And again, this hybrid way of working has enabled us to go online and talk about some of these subjects, network, getting to know you guys. I've increased my network gratefully by I don't know how many fold today. So it's been wonderful. And I thank you so much for your time and your comments. Sometimes not an easy subject to discuss. But you guys are definitely sound like professionals. We're going to close the first session here and give us a couple of minutes, and we will move to our next session, which will be moderated by Michelle Bockmann, who I've known for a while and respected very much her commentary, especially related to shipping in the energy sector. So look forward to the next session. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to part 2 of today's Women in Energy webinar. This session aims to focus on positive actions that we can take to improve gender diversity in the industry, and how we can build a more diverse workplace in shipping and the energy sector. I'm Michelle Bockmann, Markets Editor and Analyst at Lloyd's List, and I'll be moderating today's panel. And now I'd like to introduce today's panelists. First up, we have Dr. Carole Nakhle, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Crystol Energy. Dr. Nakhle is an international authority on global energy issues, in particular in the fields of policy, finance, market development, governance, energy taxes, and fiscal regimes, as well as geopolitics. And she's worked with major energy companies ENI and Statoil at executive level, and has spent time as special parliamentary advisor in the UK. Last year featured as in the top 22 outstanding women CEOs of 2022, which was published in the New York-based The Women Leaders. Welcome, Carole. Next, Rebecca Ponton is editor-in-chief at US Energy Media and the author of Breaking the Gas Ceiling. She's a US-based journalist and spent nearly 15 years in the United Arab Emirates, mainly in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and her writing has been published in Ms. Magazine, Oil Woman, Energies, and Nape magazines, and she's also a former energy contributor to Forbes.com. It's good to have you here, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And we have Josefine Ahlstrom, Vice President, Business Development Europe for price reporting agency Argus Media. Before joining Argus, Josefine spent 9 years with Shell Downstream in the strategy, marketing, and sales departments. She has a master's degree in economics from Lund University, Sweden. So thank you, Josefine, for joining us. And our last panelist is Zoe Upson, Director of FACT, Freight and Commodities Talent. She's a former oil freight derivatives broker and desk head and combines a busy family life while running FACTS. She's built many desks from scratch and has a deep understanding of the markets and how to match the best suited candidates for the right roles. And she's also the founder of Women Together, a social network that proactively strives towards making the shipping and commodities industry more diverse. So good to have you all here and welcome everyone.
Thank you.
So my first question, I'm going to ask it to you all, and if you can tell me what you would do. Many times when I visit energy, commodities and shipping companies in Europe, the only women I meet are at the reception desk and not the boardroom. And so there's a glass ceiling, but what about a sticky floor? How do we bring women up to the C-suite? So what would be the most important thing you would do to make this happen if you were made CEO? And Rebecca, I'll start with you to answer that question.
Okay, thanks so much. Happy International Women's Day, and thanks to everyone else for being here. And thanks for Vortexa for hosting this. So I think the key to this is being intentional. I think we have to be intentional and deliberate about this. And I think it's twofold. I think there's individual responsibility. We're each responsible for ourselves. And I think there's also a corporate responsibility. So as an individual, I think that it's important to make your goals known. You know, women can't hold back and be shy and not want to promote themselves. You know, if it's your goal and your ambition to be in the C-suite, then you need to make that known. And one of the things that I hear so often when I interview women is you have to take the opportunities that are presented to you. Somebody in the first panel brought this up, that a man will apply for a job or put himself forward for a position, whether he's qualified or not, or if he has a few of the qualifications. Whereas if there's a list of 10, women feel like they have to have 9, if not 10 of those qualifications. So, you know, what I hear so often from successful women is take the opportunities that are presented to you. And I think it's so important as an individual to find allies. And that's whether they're within the industry, within your company, or without. Find people who support you, who are going to encourage you. And it's important to find mentors, but also sponsors too. And so we have to take that individual responsibility, but corporations also need to promote all of these things as well. I think, you know, they've got to seek out female talent, and once they find it, they've got to develop it and promote it. And I hear so often that the energy industry hasn't done a good job of telling its story. And I don't think there's any excuse for that nowadays. We're so digitized, everything's digital, everything's virtual, everything, you know, is sent out over the internet. So there's no excuse not to tell your story. And also too, I think study companies that have been successful at this, and the two that come to mind for me are BP and Equinor. And last year, BP became the first major oil company to have more women in leadership than men. So, big shout out to BP. And of course, all that starts at the top. It starts with the top leadership. I love seeing Bernard Looney on LinkedIn, putting himself out there, making himself available for questions. And so it's important for the top leadership to, use their platform to promote these women in the public, keep them in the public eye. And so they now have 6 women and 5 men on their leadership team. Equinor's executive committee has 5 women and 7 men. So they're close, And so I think it's really important to tell those stories, get that out in the media, promote it. And like I said, there's that individual responsibility as well as the corporate responsibility.
Thanks. So being intentional. I'll move to Carole. You're CEO of a big energy company. You can do, what's the first thing you'll do to increase in diversity?
Look, I mean, you lead by example, right? You need more role models out there. So for me, I never looked at hiring people just based on gender. I look at the skills, but I also give the opportunities for men and women. And we have done several initiatives at Crystol Energy, but one of those initiatives which I really like is something that we did to support young men and women in Lebanon following the horrible port explosion. I think it was 2021, and there was a kind of really somber mood in the country. So we collaborated with the local NGOs, and we advertised for internship for 1 man and for 1 woman. So we got around 71 applicants from both gender, and we separated them, and then we interviewed, and we gave an opportunity for 1 man and for 1 woman. So that was a consciously driven way, not to say I want to hire only a woman, but also give an equal opportunity to those that are out there from both genders. So we did not really use gender to segregate, but we also wanted to support women in this sector while showing them it's a normal, place to work, whether you are a man or a woman. And even before Crystol Energy started in 2012, in 2007, I set up Access Women in Energy with the aim to support the participation and development of women in the industry. And that is a non-for-profit organization. And again, we followed the following philosophy. We are talking about gender equality, right? We're talking about giving women same opportunities. So since 2007, we've been running events on a regular basis, different formats each time, but with the aim of having equal participation for speakers and for participants of both gender, men and women present on the platform to present, and then in the participation. But also, we did not limit it to women topics. So actually, most of the topics we have covered were energy-related topics. We wanted to show the expertise that is out there, irrespective of the gender, while following consciously this kind of quota, if you want. I don't like the term quota, but the kind of goal that you wanted to achieve 50-50. And these small initiatives, you lead by example. You take certain steps to try to go beyond the gender, because it's shocking for me that here we are. I mean, 21st century, more than a century-year-old industry, and we're still talking about supporting the development of women in this industry. And by the way, it's not just the energy industry. For the last 2 weeks, I spoke at 2 events, one on women in economics and the other one on women in science. And in both events, people were complaining about limited women participation. So it goes beyond the energy. But I want to add one thing, and I'd like to be the devil's advocate, if you allow me. We're talking about the energy industry also. There's not only the culture, the dominant culture, this male-dominated culture, but there's also a fact that this is an industry which is not growing rapidly. Unlike green energy, for example, renewable energy, where you're seeing a rapid growth, I think there is a great potential there. And in the energy industry, the traditional oil and gas industry, the industry has not grown at a rapid rate. And you have people who enter the industry, primarily men, and for jobs for life. So they stay there for 30, 40 years. So how much gap you will have there to create to capture more women into this industry? I think the potential is rather limited unless you wait for the older generation to retire. But there is an opportunity also for women to take the lead, as I did, to set up their own businesses in this industry. That's another opportunity. So it's not only about going and entering existing institutions, but also be vocal in your own way and set up your own institution. So that's what I want to highlight, these two dimensions that we can discuss later.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that virtuous male circle of male networks is very, very hard to break. You raise a great point there. So I'll go to Zoe. What would you do, Zoe, if you were?
So obviously relaying the points already that have been mentioned, but something I really feel is really important is building from the ground up. You know, when I have people say to me, well, you know, I'd like to see more women. Well, the fishing pool, we actually don't have that many women to come and bring into your company. We can look to other sectors, we can look to other skill sets, but a really strong thing for me is let's build this from the bottom up. Now, another problem that we've seen in the session one and that I'm experiencing is, and Carole just lightly mentioned, is we're not seeing a lot of people young talent coming into the industry. I mean, I'm talking particularly into shipping. So that's a problem we have as a whole, let alone it being inclusive and diverse. So proactive, going out, getting young people into the industry, bringing them into the company. And then it's a big thing about confidence, empowerment, support. You know, I worked on, maybe we'll talk about this in a bit, but I worked on a broking floor and I genuinely felt I had to work twice as hard and twice as much to get where I wanted to be. I felt that maybe I was a bit of a threat because business development was quite easy for me, and I often felt held back by seniority men, but where they were making the money, you know, you get these problems. So that would just be the main thing for me to add here is build up, get a lot of girls in at an entry level, really nurture them, really take care of them, support them, empower them, and that's what I would do. And then you have your own homegrown seeds, right?
Yeah. I mean, the environment you're in is a very, very tough environment, like at shipbroking and freight derivatives broking. Josefine, very quickly, what would you do? What's the most important thing to do to bring women up to the C-suite if you were CEO and could implement some policies? I think you're on mute. Right. Okay. What we'll do is we'll move on. One of the things that was mentioned here was I would call it the imposter syndrome.
Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Oh, we can.
Yeah, good. Sorry about that.
Sorry, I'll go back to my original question with Josefine, which is what would be the most important thing you would do policy-wise to bring more women to the C-suite if you were chief executive at an energy or shipping company?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that is actually missing from this discussion we're having today, both in the first sort of section and this one, is about maternity leave. So all of us, or many of us, wants to have a family, but I don't understand why it's only women going on parental leave. So I'm Swedish, coming from a very sort of more gender neutral background where dads can go on parental leave, paid parental leave for at least 3 months or more. Whereas in other countries like here in the UK, you get 2 weeks unpaid or paid you could do, but you can't go on extended leave with paid in most cases. So for coming back to Zoe's point about the talent pool, I mean, if that maternity leave means that you're not come back into work or you struggle, already there you cut out a lot of high potentials to coming back in. And if you're not senior enough, by the time you go on maternity leave, you don't have the money in some countries enough to actually afford to go back to work. So I think for me, the main breaker here, if I would be the CEO, I would say, dads, we send you out paid paternity leave so you can help your wives and they can be successful. The second point here, again, is that once you have that talent, is to coach them. So then you need to work with that. I think it was Pamela who very nicely put in the first section here, is that unconscious bias. So there's a lot of men's been around for ages. They don't think about that women actually can do a good job. So if you do work with them telling an executive management team, for every CV you present, I need to have female CVs as well, and then work with those high potential female ladies to bring them up. So there's several things that needs to happen here in my view.
Thank you. And you raise a really good point about maternity leave. I owe my career to my husband, who looked after our twins and allowed me to go back to work. And it's refreshing to see that that's changed, obviously, since my children. But yes, maternity leave and the willingness of male partners to make that sacrifice is really key. I was talking before about imposter syndrome. And I just wondered, do others in the panel think this is holding us back? And how do we stop young women thinking this way? Have we fallen victim to it ourselves? Does anybody want to put up their hands and talk about that? Josefine, again.
Yeah, I think many have heard about the term mansplaining.
Yes.
It does happen a lot in my world. I work very lot with a lot of trading floors, commodities trading, very male dominated. But I think the phrase we should embrace is male guessing or man guessing. So you think you have a good idea, go for it. You don't need to be perfect on all the single things. So I would just say embrace man guessing. That's a new phrase I'm coining it. Go for it. Yeah.
Zoe, imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, I've fallen guilty for that myself, you know, coming through as a young broker and then going and setting up facts and utilizing platforms like LinkedIn. I have sort of 12,000 followers on there, you know, being put in trade rooms. I was like, oh, do I really have an opinion here, you know, kind of. But I actually feel that if more of us had a voice and again, I think it's confidence coming in as a young age, you know, and actually just having the confidence to speak out. And from that, I've had a lot of women around the world messaging me saying, you know, thank you for being a voice. And I'm, you know, saying, oh, well, you know, I'm thinking, oh, well, I'm not really, am I? You know, but I think it's just sometimes it's just taking that plunge and seeing a problem in the industry, and one that I was personally, you know, affected by. I just wanted to see more girls on the floor. I wish, going back now, I had a female mentor who told me how to negotiate my salary, told me how to negotiate, you know, I never wanted to rock the boat, and I wish I did, because so many times I was like, oh, okay, I don't want to do that. And I just wish there was more of that, so we wouldn't fall for imposter syndrome and we would be confident in ourselves and what we're doing.
I just want to pick up that mentoring theme. Is that a role? Should that be a corporate responsibility, or should that be a female responsibility? It's something that a female has to do. Carole, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't think it's just to be just female. And that's why when I'm listening to this conversation, one thing comes to my mind. I know it's a special day, Women's Day, but and again, it goes back to the culture that we have at Crystol Energy and at Access Women Energy, that why it has to be like just women talking about women issue. And I tell you where I'm coming from. I was invited a year ago to an event, the whole day on women in energy and what they are dealing with, all the challenges. But then the following day, the same organizer had a whole day on energy topics without a single female speaker. And that for me kind of was pretty annoying, because I mean, why do we have to single out that women should mentor women and men deal with everything else? I think we get lots of good insights from our, you know, male supporters in the group, members in the Access Women Energy group. I get on very well with my male colleagues at Crystol Energy and elsewhere. And the same thing, they actually bring in their own perspective, and we kind of share with them what we are facing. So this kind of segregation, men versus women, I'm not a fan of, and therefore mentoring should be open to everyone and not just exclusive for women mentoring women. Of course, it brings a lot of interest because we share, let's say, the issue of, you know, what Josefine talked about, maternity leave, being a mother, all other challenges, but it's equally important to bring in another's perspective, because actually mentoring works both ways. Sometimes the mentor learns a lot from his or her mentee.
And I think sometimes mentoring is possible in large corporate organizations, but in smaller companies where, you know, the culture may be dog eat dog, it's possibly not something that is readily available for everybody. Rebecca, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on mentoring? Should it be a corporate responsibility? Should we be looking at policies that, you know, that deliberately keep, I'm thinking about manels here, that having
yes, I'm very anti-manel.
yeah.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember reading a couple of years ago, and I believe it was a scientific conference, and a very prominent man in the field came forth and said, I will no longer speak on any panels that don't include at least one woman. And so I thought that was great. And I think that's something that that other men need to do as well. I mean, find out who else is on the panel. I know when I see conferences coming up, I always look at the speakers, and I have actually approached conference organizers and said, you don't have any women on this panel, or, you know, you've got 20 men and 2 women. Here's a whole list of women that you could approach. And I just give it to them, you know, and so, yeah, I mean, I think it's really important not to have manels, and also not to have, you know, not just men and women, but diversity across the board, you know, other types of diversity as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally think that the responsibility for mentoring women in organizations should not be the responsibility of the women in the organization. It's really the responsibility of the entire culture. You know, it's part of the culture. So one of the other issues, of course, is how do we attract a more diverse talent pool? I fell into shipping and energy markets by accident, and I suspect we all have. How do we bring women into the industry, so at least we have a pool to promote? I think, Zoe, you had some thoughts there.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, building the ground up, going out to universities, I actually set up Women Together. That group formulated really organically. I was trying to hire more women on my desk. I actually really struggled to find women who wanted to come and work as a broker.
Now, why is that?
I suppose the environment seems really harsh, off-putting, long hours. You know, there's no room to be crying. You know, often there might have been times that I'm a frustrated day, but, you know, in my interview, they said to me, are you thick-skinned? And I said, well, yeah, I've got 2 older brothers. And they said, well, what are you gonna do when we, and they literally swore at me. And I said, well, I'll swear back. Yeah. And they said, fine, you can have the job. So for a lot of girls, I think they'll be very overwhelmed and intimidated. The hours can be really long. And again, as Josefine said, this isn't that appealing for women, particularly if they want to have family one day. I had to hire a full-time nanny in order to be a broker and a mother, because the hours that nurseries were open didn't facilitate the hours I was working in London. So you can imagine the cost on that would be astronomical. And again, you know, it's such a wonderful idea that Josefine was saying, you know, let's put some onto the men as well, have really good maternity packages and paternity packages and balance it there. And, you know, in order to sort of, you know, as I was saying before, you know, it's not that appealing to women. And I also think a lot of women who, I'm talking particularly now from shipping and broking side of things, I don't think they speak that fondly about the industry all the time, which is such a shame, because I think they're held back, you know, sometimes often. And again, it's exposure to other women. And that's why I always try, and so many women speak so amazingly about shipping and working in these markets, but a lot of girls don't. And I think, oh my God, please, we need to change that. We need to make positive experiences, seeing women being empowered, seeing women being promoted, seeing women in C-suites, allowing and utilizing, you know, social media platforms for women who are in positions in power and have got really amazing, successful careers, and allowing them to have a sort of a free flow on social media. You know, if you look at Hannah, I think her name is Howman from Trafigura. She's the head of carbon there. You know, I actually, if you look at Trafigura, they've got so many women in positions of power, and they're quite proactive on being out on social media. And I think that's so important in order to get a more diverse talent pool. And again, what little girl goes, I want to be in shipping or on a broking floor? We're not, again, I always say the ground up. So, you know, could people be going out to universities? You know, I would like to turn women together from a social into a platform in which companies can come and speak about the process in interviews for their company, the roles, the benefits, a place where girls can come. And then we have university representatives who would learn how to pitch about, you know, being in our industries and the group women together, and just allowing a platform. Let's say, you know, Josefine from Argos wanted to speak about what roles they had there that'd be interesting for women to come to. What's the interview process like? What's the working like? What's the what's the maternity packages like? You know, anything like that, and just a platform where it, you know, it can be seen. And again, I just think so much needs to be out there and proactive. You know, we can all talk about it today as much as we want, but then where do we go here today?
Well, that sort of gets me back to a question for Carole, because I know that the industry struggles a lot with this greenwashing, and I'm just wondering, are we seeing gender washing? Because today there's been lots of pledges and commitments on diversity, but you know, those numbers that were given in the first session, you know, 16% or 15% in the C-suite is very, very low. Are companies just paying lip service, do you think, Carole?
Could be, and actually we will never find out. But let's again go back a little bit in history to 2015. If you look at what happened in 2015, you have the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and they have SDG number 5, which is about gender equality. However, the United Nations clearly says that although it's a standalone objective, which is number 5, but actually it is fundamental to achieving all the other objectives for sustainable development. And since then, if you try to look at the various initiatives that appeared within energy companies worldwide, you can see how they have mushroomed tremendously after the publication of the SDGs by the United Nations. Now, of course, when something grows so quickly and initiatives appear everywhere, you will not be able to distinguish between what is genuine, what is not. And for me, of course, many of these they have been enforced, if you want, on organizations, because why do we have to wait more than a century for a publication of SDG to take such an initiative? If we did not believe in it to start with, why we have to wait for somebody to tell us? So there is definitely something into it, but you know what? I don't care, because I will not be able to distinguish between who is genuine, who is not. But once we have this kind of progress, these kind of developments, then we normalize something which was pretty rather not normal or abnormal in the past. That said, I want to go back again to a point I mentioned earlier, and I think was touched upon by my co-panelists, that okay, if we have, let's say, a company, whether it's doing gender washing or not, but how do you get, first of all, that pool of talent to start with? How do you attract those young women and men? Because it's the problem across the industry for both gender, by the way, to bring in young talent irrespective, but mostly women. How do you convince them to enter an industry which for many, especially if we talk about, again, oil and gas, a conventional business, as dirty, dying, no future? So I think that is the real problem here, is to create, a lot of effort that the companies should do in terms of conveying a positive image for these young women out there, that they can build a successful career for many years to come, and they can be part of a solution, not a problematic industry. So there are a lot of communication that needs to be improved out there. And just one last point to conclude with this one. I mean, I go a lot to the Middle East, and I come from the Middle East, from Lebanon. And I have to say, in Saudi Arabia, which I visited recently, I was so impressed by the number of women at their ministry. So they have done a great job within a few years. But I would say that I would really celebrate when I see half of OPEC ministers being women. That's when I see that the real change has finally happened.
Well, that's certainly not the case now, and who knows when that will happen. We've come to the end of our time. I had hoped to discuss whether or not COVID had been a game changer because of the ability for flexible working, but unfortunately, that's it. So I'd like to say thank you very much to Rebecca and to Carole, Josefine and Zoe and everybody else for attending, and say that's it. And we will be having this on recording. Thank you for attending, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.